Hello everyone, I am Sarp Yılmaz, a student at Bilkent University. My department is Mechanical Engineering. In this video, I will be talking about my experiment and also I will present my experiment. First of all, I'm going to talk about what I did in the experiment. My experiment consisted of two parts. In the first part, I calculated a spring's constant by using an air table. In the second part, I calculated the friction coefficient between three objects and a surface using the same spring from the first part of the experiment. Now, let me briefly touch on the theory behind the experiment. In an environment where there are no non-conservative forces, the total energy is conserved. This is called the law of conservation of energy. The energy can transform into each other. For example, potential energy can turn into kinetic energy or vice versa, but it cannot be completely destroyed. In the first part of the experiment, this was utilized. Now, in the second part of the experiment, I used the work energy principle. The work energy principle states that total of all work done by the forces will be equal to the change in the kinetic energy. In an environment where only the friction does the work, the change in kinetic energy will be equal to the work done by the friction forces. Using this theorem, we should be able to find the friction coefficient between the objects and the surfaces. Now, in the first part of the experiment, I used an air table. I picked up a random spring I found in the lab, a compression spring. I put this spring on the air table and I compressed the spring using the puck that is on the air table. And then I released the puck and measured the velocity of the puck. Then, using the law of conservation that I've talked about beforehand, I was able to calculate the spring's constant. In the second part of the experiment, I grabbed three random objects that I could find from the lab. These were two wooden objects and one metal puck. These objects were used to compress the spring. Afterwards, the objects were released, and the distance that was traveled by the objects was recorded. This part of the experiment was recorded with a camera in order to use an app called Tracker. Using this app, I was able to do further measurements. For example, I was able to measure the initial velocity of the objects. This way, I was able to find out how much potential energy got converted into kinetic energy, so how much energy was left behind essentially. And by using the distance that was recorded and the kinetic energy, initial kinetic energy, I was able to find, using the work energy principle, I was able to find the friction force and the friction coefficient.